And welcome back to your Daily Bagel Weekly Roundup. It has been a busy week in South Africa. There's been plenty on the cards and a lot moving underneath the surface. So let's get straight into the biggest stories, what actually happened and why it matters. So many South Africans are still arguing about whether fixing the past is finished or whether we're not even close to being done. And this week, that debate turned practical as government handed back more than 17,000 hectares of land in KZN to communities who were forced off of it decades ago. Now, this land took more than 27 years to return, and according to President Ramaphosa, this is exactly what restitution looks like. You see, speaking over Human Rights Day, he argued that rights don't mean much if they only exist on paper. They need to show up in the form of land ownership, economic access, and everyday living conditions. And so that's why in this case, the land will stay commercially active with these new beneficiaries earning income from the existing forestry operations, rather than it simply being handed back to them and left there. But this is where the divide becomes clear. You see, supporters see policies like land reform and BEE as unfinished business, a necessary correction in an economy that was built to exclude. Now, critics, though, argue the opposite, that this continued redress risks slowing growth and deterring investments, and that the focus should rather shift towards expanding the pie instead. And beyond that, there's the more fundamental question of how do we know when it's done? What does enough correction look like? And is there some clear endpoint at all? Either way, this week has made one thing clear. Restitution is a chapter that South Africa has not closed yet. It is still actively writing it. So the folks at Unisa were clearly inspired by the latest Top Gun movie because they have gone ahead and bought an airport.
What?
Not access to one, not a partnership, a full-on 20-hectare airfield, making it the first university in Africa to own one. So the plan is to use it as a training and research facility for students in aviation, engineering, drone technology, and advanced digital systems. You know, the kind of fields where you can't exactly learn everything from a lecture room. And so the idea here is to give students real-world exposure where theory actually meets something tangible. But zoom out, and this is actually less about planes and more about positioning. You see, Unisa has built its name on what they call open distance learning, a model built around remote study, scale, and accessibility, not necessarily hands-on experience. And so this move signals a shift towards skills-based training. And in a country where the gap between having a degree and having the practical experience for a job is still pretty wide, that shift might matter more than the runway itself. So as millions of South Africans hit the road this Easter, enforcement is actually stepping up in a big way. More roadblocks, more patrols, and more routine checks on licenses, vehicle condition, and outstanding fines. Now, Easter has always been a very busy period on the roads, but what's changed now is how closely everything is being tracked. You see, fines are no longer just sitting in silos or getting lost in the system. They are increasingly linked to your ID and business registration and pulled together across municipalities, which means that tickets from months ago can still show up when you least expect it. Furthermore, with more of these speed cameras and these digital systems at play, fewer things are now slipping through the cracks. Now, the catch is that most people only realize that there's a problem when they're already standing next to an officer on the side of the road. And so with that in mind, there are now platforms like Fines SA and Pay City that let you check what's on your record in one place. Now, not to go rush out and pay everything, but rather just to know where you stand before you travel. So lifestyle audits are meant to be government's way of catching officials living beyond their salaries. You know, the flashy cars, the unexplained assets, the stuff that doesn't really add up. And so on paper, they've been rolled out across government departments and positioned as an anti-corruption tool. But in practice, the system is running into a quieter problem. You see, these very departments being audited aren't always willing to play along. So some are resisting the process outright, which is why the Special Investigating Unit is now pushing for what is called a blanket proclamation to essentially enforce audits across some of these departments instead of relying on simple cooperation.
Why are you running?
But hey, even when these audits do happen, they're not hard to dodge. Officials can resign, retire, or move departments mid-process, and in many cases, the investigation just simply stops there. I mean, recent reporting indicates that less than half of the flag cases are actually pursued further. So you end up with a system that's getting better at spotting red flags, but still struggles to act on them. And so that's the tension here. Lifestyle audits are designed to expose corruption, but without consistent, unavoidable enforcement, they risk becoming more of a signal than a solution. So South African universities are tightening the rules around AR, but not in the way you'd expect. You see, this isn't a blanket ban. It's an attempt to figure out how these tools like ChatGPT actually fit into a degree and how much of that work should come from the students themselves. So across institutions like UCT, Stellenbosch, UP, and Stadio, there's been this rather obvious, noticeable rise in students using AR for assignments, especially take-home assignments and online tests. And so the challenge here, as you can expect, is that these AI-generated answers often look completely original, making them far harder to flag than traditional plagiarism. And so instead of relying on these unreliable AI detection tools, universities are actually starting to shift their approach, redesigning assessments, introducing oral checks, and focusing more on how work is produced rather than what just gets submitted. And so this is where things get more nuanced. You see, some universities are using what they call traffic light systems for different assignments. Red means no AI, amber means limited use, and green actively encourages it. Because look, the reality is AI can be incredibly useful for a lot of students. It can act like a tutor on demand to help them structure their thinking. But it can also quietly replace that thinking altogether. And so right now, universities are trying to draw a line that didn't exist a few years ago between assistance and authorship. And on to our bagel bite of the day. Let's see what you got. The question is, which is the only sovereign country in the world named after a woman? Is it A, St. Lucia, B, Ireland, or C, Dominica? We'll give you the answer at the end of the show. So just next door in Namibia, there is a town that didn't fall apart. It was buried alive. Coleman's was once one of the richest places in Southern Africa, built almost overnight after diamonds were discovered there in 1908. And at its peak, it had everything: a hospital, a ballroom, school, even the first X-ray facility in the Southern Hemisphere, reportedly used as much to scan workers for stolen diamonds as it was for medical care. But the boom didn't last. By the late 1920s, richer diamond deposits were found further south, and the town's economic center of gravity shifted with them. Residents slowly packed up and left, chasing opportunity down the coast. By the 1950s, Coleman's was completely abandoned, a fully built town with no one left to live in it. And so that's where it gets pretty surreal. With no maintenance and nothing left to hold it back, the desert simply moved in. The sand pushed through the doors, it climbed the staircases and filled entire rooms. And so it's fascinating because you can explain the economics, you can trace the migration, but standing there right now, it just looks like something out of a Christopher Nolan film. And as for that bagel bite, the answer is St. Lucia. It is named after St. Lucy of Syracuse, a Christian martyr from the 3rd century, making it the only country in the world named after an actual historical female figure. As for the others, Ireland is actually named after a goddess, and Dominica comes from the day it was discovered. And my friends, that's it for your weekly roundup. We'll keep things moving during the week with our daily posts and our reels, but this is the show where we put it all together. Still early days in this new format. We're still trying to figure this thing out, so we do really appreciate your patience and thank you for the continued support. We'll catch you all next Sunday for the next round of the good stuff. God bless.